Last month, 3D Juegos conducted an interview with Sven Vinca, Larian's owner and creative director, and this article was edited by Brenda Giacconi, and to my surprise, this pretty old interview at this point actually contains some great information that many of you may be unaware of and I haven't heard a lot of people talk about. I have not covered any of this information on the channel yet, so this is not info covered in the recent Reddit AMA. I should also mention that this interview, I'm assuming, was done in English, as I don't believe Sven speaks Spanish. Maybe he does. While the article was written in Spanish, so of course I had to translate it back to English, so it is possible that some of this info or context may be misrepresented or lost in translation. Let's jump right into it though, starting with some actually gameplay relevant information, most people's favorite subject of discussion, leading off with a mention of combat. So Sven says, "We've learned a lot from Baldur's Gate 3 and Original Sin 2 and how to improve turn-based combat. So you see an evolved turn-based combat system, which I think is really great and also gives you a lot of freedom." So we already knew that Divinity will be turn-based combat, of course, but it's definitely really interesting to hear Sven say an evolved turn-based combat system with a lot of freedom. I'm personally a fan of both Original Sin 2's turn-based combat system and Baldur's Gate 3's 5th edition style system, even though it is a little bit more limiting. Both systems are really good in their own unique ways, I would say. And I'm trying to imagine Larian taking the best from both, which we already kind of know that they're doing that, but then also evolving on that iteration. Really exciting stuff, and it's also great to hear how Sven is already confident in saying an evolved system. It's not we're trying to do an evolved system. It is an evolved system. Sven also said, "There's also how you deal with your enemies, but they're quite intelligent as well." So to me, this clearly indicates even more creative solutions for players to mess around with in combat, many of which are likely environmental interaction focused. But this could also be touching on non-hostile solutions as well. Regardless, this is where Larian excels, and they seem to be confident once again in this category. But it also sounds like we can expect improved AI for opponents, something that both BG3 and Original Sin 2 could benefit from. There's always room for improvement in this category, so it's great to hear this mentioned so early on. In regards to previous statements that Larian has made, where they said that Divinity will be their biggest game yet, even bigger than Baldur's Gate 3, that bigger word doesn't necessarily equate to more hours, and Sven actually touches on this. Many people did start running away with that narrative, and understandably so, but Sven clarifies here. "I didn't say it's more hours. You have more freedom to decide how to spend those hours. It's like you have more ... A very simple example would be when you start playing Baldur's Gate 3. You're at the crash site on the beach where the Nautiloid crashes, and you always have to go through the town. Now, with Divinity, you can go in various directions. You'll have different adventures depending on what you do and how you go, and so on. There's more freedom and player agency in how you progress through the narrative." Absolutely wonderful to hear this. Let's say that Baldur's Gate 3 is an 80 to 100 hour average player experience. Instead of focusing on turning Divinity into a game that's 130 to 150 average player experience, they're instead focusing on adding more permutations, more freedom to go down different pathways, putting more agency in the hands of us players to do things in a way that we want to do them, and the game actually having a response for that, unique pathways forward for that, unique ways for the game to react and adapt to the player's decisions. Sven even mentions the start of the game specifically and says that we'll have more freedom to go in various directions at the start, more so than Baldur's Gate 3, and he follows this statement up with, "In fact, we were thinking the other day and said, maybe we need to guide them a bit more because perhaps we're giving them too much freedom. So we'll decide based on what the players think and how they can discover certain things. I mean, we're still experimenting and playing around with it, but there are things that are... There's a level of interaction with the game and consequences of what you've done that are much deeper, I think, than what you had in Baldur's Gate 3. So yeah, it sounds like many of us players are going to have vastly different experiences when it comes to Divinity, even more so than Baldur's Gate 3. And that even comes down to the very, very start of the game with where you choose to go. Now, it does make me wonder if the start of Divinity will be placing us players in a very unfamiliar location, in an environment where we don't really even know where to go initially, as it's that foreign. Now, don't forget, at the Game Awards before the Divinity trailer premiered, we watched a skit of some actors dressed as villagers getting sucked up into the sky with that weird black hole eclipse looking thing in the background. So perhaps something like that will happen to us players at the start, and wherever we end up getting sucked to, maybe it's hell, maybe it's space, I don't know. Initially, there's going to be this oh crap moment. I have no idea where I need to go right now. Now, one of the reasons why Larian has more of an ability to offer more freedom to players than they did in Baldur's Gate 3, which already had a ton, and actually have unique high-quality content that comes with this newfound freedom, is because they now have a much more efficient process with a lot of automation, and much of this is due to their new engine, Divinity 5.0. For example, in BG3, Sven says it took them 3 weeks to be able to hear and see an actor's performance in the game, but now it takes them only 2 hours. Direct quote from Sven translated from the article: "When an actor finishes their performance, it's processed, automatically cut, and a lot of things are done, and then you see it in the game." It's a pretty crazy difference, and with that saved time, rather than doing less overall, Larian seems to instead be using that saved time to create more varied content for us, the players. But moving on, let's talk about visuals. So Larian not only says that we can expect a higher production value in Divinity, but he also specifically says that it's more visually appealing. And earlier in the interview, he says that it looks more impressive than anything we did in Baldur's Gate 3. Now, of course, it's not crazy to expect better visuals, but this has piqued my interest a bit, as Baldur's Gate 3 already looks really good. So I'm really curious how noticeable the improvements will be in Divinity, how different it will be from Baldur's Gate 3. And once again, the reason why Larian is able to do this is because of that Divinity Engine 5.0. BG3 was made with Divinity Engine 4.0, and according to Sven, 5.0 is capable of doing things they couldn't do before, and it's better in every way. So they're really focused on making sure they continue to improve their game engine with each game so that they have the opportunity to improve in all categories. Now, some of you, and understandably so, may be worried a bit here with that increase in visual quality. Will you be able to run the game, especially with seemingly higher prices incoming with a lot of gaming equipment, especially RAM, etc., or some of the higher prices already here, but will you be able to run the game? Well, Sven also mentioned that scalability is built into what they're doing, so depending on where the average consumer tech is when Divinity actually releases, Larian does have the ability to adapt and scale things down if needed, so take that as you will. But let's now get into some big story / lore information that was revealed, and that is Sven revealing not only that this game takes place after Original Sin 2, which most of us already assumed, and I think it was even mentioned in other interviews, but the big reveal here for those that are unaware of this particular interview is that 100 years or so have passed since that game. And this game takes place after Original Sin 2, so the events of the previous games are in the past, but they're recognized as things that have happened, even though the world has evolved. About 100 years have passed, just as Baldur's Gate 3 took place 100 years after Baldur's Gate 2.
Hey, it's me, Emmeline.
So this is pretty big information for lore and story lovers out there, as even though 100 years is a long time for us mere humans on planet Earth, in a video game's lore timeline, it's really not that much. And even though we already know that Divinity will be its own unique standalone story in many ways, you don't have to have played previous Divinity franchise games to enjoy it. 100 years from Original Sin 2 still leaves this game very relevant to most games on the Divinity timeline. Outside of Dragon Commander and Original Sin 1, the other Divinity games take place between 1218 AD and 1300 AD, with Original Sin 2 specifically in 1242 AD, and of course Divinity 2 Ego Draconis in 1300 AD, which is the closest to this next game. Now the problem is that Larian has not yet mentioned Ego Draconis specifically, which makes many of us question what and how much of that game is actually canon, and what and how much is relevant to Divinity. Well, despite Larian specifically mentioning in the press kit briefing that Original Sin, the first game, and Original Sin 2 are the two games players should consider playing to enjoy greater understanding and more continuity with Divinity, this is likely not only for world building reasons, as those two games, especially Original Sin 2, are when Larian started focusing a bit more on the importance of world building in their games. but also because those two games are the most modern of the Divinity games, the most playable in modern times. But despite stating that, in this interview, Sven also says, so the events of the previous games are in the past, but they're recognized as things that have happened, even though the world has evolved. So yeah, that's a pretty non-specific statement as to what previous games are the most relevant to Divinity. He kind of just says, you know, the Divinity games as a whole is the way that I'm reading this. He doesn't single out Original Sin 1 and 2 like he does in the press kit. But it's important to note that he did not say that Ego Draconis is not important. In fact, this just makes it seem like all the games have some importance or are somewhat relevant. So I'm not going to assume that Ego Draconis is a throwaway game as of right now, and I'm going to assume that the lore and the story of that game has at least some relevance to Divinity, which is exciting because I have a few things I can talk about in future videos. But yeah, the big news is that it's roughly 100 years after Original Sin 2, which is the game that Larian put the biggest focus on world building on compared to the other Divinity games. So info on the gods, locations, planes of existence, races, factions, all that stuff. I think all that information that you get in Original Sin 2 will be important, at least in some ways, to Divinity, but it also means that there are plenty of characters that we met in Original Sin 2 as well as the other games that can and certainly are still alive. And in the Reddit AMA, Larian even stated that there will be some continuity in characters from previous games. I'll do a video on that sometime in the near future. Hopefully I can get an answer soon about how important Ego Draconis specifically is, as it's the closest to Divinity in the timeline, and I would like to know before I spend all this time and effort studying it and doing videos, etc. But I don't have an answer for that as of right now, but I think it's going to be at least somewhat important. Another Sven quote from the interview. Okay, what can we do to make our universe really solid, coherent, and realistic so that when you see someone walking around it, you believe they're doing it with a purpose, with meaning, and everything that they do fits into this world? ? So we started defining these things, and at the same time, we were very careful to ensure continuity so that people who had played the previous games would still see the continuation in what was coming next. And people coming into this world could say, oh, this feels like a real solid world. So the AMA touched a bit on Larian having a big focus on world building this time around. They even hired a bunch more writers for this. So I won't dwell on this topic too much in this video, but it is really good to hear Sven once again say something regarding this. So even if you choose not to try to learn any previous Divinity lore before Divinity comes out, the Divinity game itself should explain most, if not all, of the important previous lore very well on its own, whether that be through characters, with dialogue, cutscenes, books found in the world, etc. And for those of us who will know the previous lore, we can expect a ton of new lore, and of course will recognize a lot of the previous events that are mentioned. Some tricks are reused, so hopefully you'll feel like you've stepped into a solid fantasy world with lots of surprises, with lots of things that will make you say, oh, that's really new. I've never seen anything like that. And that will bring you a lot of joy. And 3 quick topics, actually 4, there's going to be a bonus one at the end. Before I end the video here, number 1 is that in the article, Sven reveals that Original Sin 2 sold over 10 million copies as of last month. We already knew that it had surpassed, I think, 7.5 million back prior to when Baldur's Gate 3 was getting ready to release, as more people started looking at Larian's catalog, of course. But now it's over 10 million, and I think that makes Larian the creators of the 2 best-selling CRPGs of all time. Second up, Sven was asked if he has ever thought about remastering the more classic games in the franchise, and although he said that they're not doing it right now, he did also say that he would like to remaster them and, for example, add full cinematics. So it's not completely out of the picture to expect some sort of remaster or remake of some of the older Divinity games, Divine Divinity, Beyond Divinity, Ego Draconis perhaps, but I wouldn't expect that anytime soon. And number 3 here, the interviewer asked Sven about Soul for Frost Island, which was the more unknown canceled game in Larian's somewhat recent past. Most folks seem to only be aware of the canceled Divinity game called Fallen Heroes, but Sven stated that something that they did with that game was so great that they couldn't use it back then, but now we can, he says, and that they're definitely using it. So after doing some quick research on the little that we can learn about Soul for Frost Island, which was the project's code name, This project apparently made it quite far into development before the studio pulled the plug, and in Sven's own words, in an article from 2023, he said that this was Original Sin 2 with new mechanics, but wouldn't state what those new mechanics are because they have plans to reuse them for something else at some point. So yeah, naturally one would assume that he was speaking on Divinity here, but this was most likely said before they were committed to making the upcoming Divinity, as this article was around the time of BG3's release. But it seems like they had some sort of innovative, exciting evolution of Original Sin 2's combat way back in the day as an idea, and they're finally bringing that back to light now with improved resources, a bigger budget, etc. And to end the video, I'm going to take you guys quickly over to X here. It's a great, lovely place where everybody loves each other. But Sven posted today about appreciating all the employees at Larian, even ones that are not developers themselves, ones that run the office and do a lot of the behind-the-scenes stuff that never get credit. But below this post, YouTuber Legendary Drops commented, "Sven, all I want to know is if we're getting panels from Hell back." And Sven responded, "Need to get into Hell first." So this is, I don't know what this really, I mean, speculating on this, it sounds like we're going to Hell. I think we already kind of knew that with the Hellstones, but there's a lot of speculation out there as to where this game is going to take place. And I think maybe Tartarus, or maybe it's a new plane of existence. We're going to be going to Hell in Divinity. So, right, kind of confirmation there. And this also makes me wonder if like our objective is going to be to actually go to Hell to maybe stop something happening there. I don't know. Thank you all so much for watching. Much more Divinity content to come. I have so many videos lined up, you know, story recaps of previous games, all that good stuff that'll lead us to early access and lead us to the launch of Divinity and beyond. Very excited to be covering this game, and everything I'm hearing about it makes me very confident in what we should expect here. Catch y'all in the next one.